Hello again, ladies and gentlemen. We are continuing on our journey through industrialization, big business and labor, and today our focus is going to be on labor or worker organizations. So as usual, you will be taking your notes in your notebook, 3/4, 1/4. Feel free to stop this along the way to write down anything that I've said or to get the information as it's on the screen through the PowerPoint. So we had been talking about some of the issues of the Gilded Age and the robber barons and creating very difficult times for their workers, especially in these big industries, in these monopolies and trusts. And so as a result of all the problems that workers faced, things like long hours, low pay, poor working conditions, child labor, very unsafe conditions, not having benefits for their jobs or having any job security, worker unions started to come to the forefront. So by the late 1800s, labor unions begin to grow, and they use methods like collective bargaining and the strike to combat those low wages and poor working conditions of the Gilded Age. I'm sure you all know what a strike is. A strike is when you stop work, and if a company has workers who are unhappy and dissatisfied and they decide to stop their work, the production of the product that they are doing, that could be a very, very good way to get what they want from the employers. That's probably at the more extreme end when you haven't had the opportunities to have conversations with your employer as a union or as workers. So that might be kind of a final ultimatum. Collective bargaining, on the other hand, means the workers and the employers sit down together and collectively together bargain for what each wants. And when you negotiate, when you compromise, you know you each get a little of what you want. You both don't get everything, but you are able to negotiate and compromise and bargain for what things are the most important to you, whether you're the worker or the employer. And so three important unions come to the forefront. The first one is known as the Knights of Labor. And the Knights of Labor were begun in the 1860s, I'll say. I don't have an exact date in front of me, but the leader was Terence Powderly, kind of a fun name. And the Knights of Labor were really meant to bring all workers, skilled and unskilled workers, together in one union to work for what is known as bread and butter issues. The things that they needed the most: better pay, less hours, better working conditions. And they allowed women and African Americans as well to join. The Knights of Labor, as the first true national union, met with some resistance, not just from employers but even from the government. And as a result, rather than do more of that collective bargaining, they tended more to side on the side of violence and strikes. And one of the important strikes that they had formulated was known as the Haymarket Square Riot. And the Haymarket Square is in Chicago, and large numbers of workers came together. The police tried to disband them, tried to move them from being such a large assembled group, and in the process several people are hurt, killed, bombs go off, shots are fired, police are killed. It really left a bad taste in the mouth of people about unions. That unions were violent, they were very difficult to work with, and so the riot led to the decline of the Knights of Labor. But not to be worried, because another union is going to pick up the cause, and that's known as the American Federation of Labor. This is going to be led by Samuel Gompers. again later in the 1860s and 70s. And what Samuel Gompers did, excuse me, along with the other leaders of the American Federation of Labor, or known as the AFL, they decided to create smaller unions of skilled workers who had specific things that they wanted to work for within their own job. Let me give you an example. One union, smaller union, might have been made up of, say, carpenters. Another small union would have been made up of plumbers. Another union might have been made up of bricklayers. Another union might have been made up of teachers, because each job entity really has specific things they want to work toward. I don't know what a plumber would want in terms of better working conditions or pay, nor would a plumber know what I as a teacher would want. So it made sense to formulate these groups of skilled trades into their own specific unions so that they could fight for their own specific needs. And then together as a whole, all of these smaller unions were known as the American Federation of Labor, and they too focused on real strong bread and butter issues: better pay, less hours, benefits, better working conditions. Specifically, one particular workers' union was known as the International Ladies Garment Workers Union. These were people who worked within the garment industry, worked in the textile industry, making clothes and cloth, thread, etc. They represented the sweatshop workers of the cities. Big cities like New York and Philadelphia, Boston, Baltimore all had really, really large factories. And the large factories really became the norm in these big cities. And so these women, mainly women, and some men, worked in horrifying conditions. And after the 1911 Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire, in which about 150 young women were killed, jumping to their death from the fire on the 7th or 8th floor, they realized that they needed to do something. So they really fought for much better conditions, especially fire escapes. These workers in 1911 in New York City, in this Triangle Shirtwaist Factory, were actually locked into the building once they got there. So when the fire took over the building, they couldn't get out, and they ended up jumping out of the windows. So this was a very important occurrence, not because 150 women were killed as a result of it, but because it helped to show that better conditions were needed for workers, and they actually created a Department of Labor to look into some of these problems to protect worker rights. And strikes were fairly common in the late 1800s. Some of the reasons were because there was a gap between the rich and the poor, and it was growing larger. There were tensions between workers and the business owners. The workers organized into unions. The business leaders didn't like the unions. They opposed the unions because it meant eventually they may have to pay them more. They may have to give them some of their demands. And so an era of very large and violent strikes begins in 1877 with a nationwide railroad strike, which we talked about and you saw on the George F. Johnson video. And here are just some of the examples of the strikes. The Great Railway Strike, the Haymarket Riot, which I just referred to, the Homestead Strike, which was in Pennsylvania. That was a Carnegie Steel strike. The Pullman Strike in 1892 as well, which was a railroad strike, railroad car strike. And then the Lawrence Textile Strike in Massachusetts of factory workers in the textile industry. And almost always the government would side with the business, not with the workers, and many times had to put down the strikes using army troops. They would actually bring in troops to disband the striking workers. Many times people getting hurt or killed, and it just, as I said, left a very, very bad taste in the mouth of people who thought unions had a pretty good cause, but the way in which they tried to get their demands met were sometimes violent, and they didn't like it. Now, one of the things we realize that industrialization does is it does cause urbanization. It causes cities to grow. In 1880, 25% of Americans lived in cities. In 1900, 40% of Americans lived in cities. And by 1920, over 50% of all Americans lived in cities. So you can tell what's happening during industrialization. There's a shift, a move from rural to urban living. Some people think that quick city growth or very fast city growth led to some very negative effects, although we cannot always say that it's just negative. There were some positives. So let's talk about some of them. Number one, we would probably understand this. Because the population was growing so fast, housing could not keep up with it. And this led to the growth of slums and tenements, which are those huge buildings, apartment houses in which lots of people lived in the city. And you probably talked about that when you were in maybe 7th or 8th grade talking about immigration. Again, the population growth, the crowding, overcrowding really helped to spread disease. Water, sanitation, very insufficient. Not at all taking good care of garbage pickup or sewage treatment, which led to very poor health conditions. And last but not least, politically, you found a lot of corruption in these big cities. Big cities tended to have kind of unregulated people running the cities and the finances of the cities. This was very common, especially in New York, in which a man by the name of Boss Tweed became very strong, powerful, and almost, I would say, more of like a, if I could use the word, dictator of what was happening in New York City. Stealing the public money was very common. But positively, we know that city growth is going to be helped by technology. You're going to have subways and elevators, skyscrapers. It's going to be that vertical growth as opposed to horizontal. Electricity, new water and sewage systems. So all of this grows out of the great technology that is already in place. Culturally, people like to be in the cities because there's more to do. Museums, concert halls, theaters, parks, different types of newspapers, better schools, higher education. Think of the reasons why you like to go to a big city, whether it's New York or Boston. There's just a lot more to do. And last but not least, there was some reform going on in the cities, trying to help especially immigrants, but those people who were poor working class factory workers needed help with, once they found a job, finding good housing and making sure they had enough food and maybe some health care. So a person by the name of Jane Addams, if you remember her, we talked about her not too long ago, I think, along with Dorothea Dix, started a place called Hull House, which were settlement houses for immigrants. And they helped to create a place where immigrants could go and seek advice, get some help, and just get used to living in the city, especially when they were very new to it and they didn't understand English. It was just a way to improve their lives in the cities. So that's where I'm going to leave off for today. As I said, I hope that you can just stop along the way here, get down your notes, and when we get into class, what I'll do is I'll make note of some of the text pages that you can refer to for more information. This, again, is an addition to all the other notes that you've been taking based on industrialization, and I hope that you have a good day. You are the horizon to my sky. I so look forward to seeing you on a daily basis, and I hope everything's going well for you. Have a great day, and I'll see you in class.